Welcome to Hope on Fire, relevant talk radio for young adults. Whether you're 25 or 45, there's bound to be a discussion that you care about. Our mission is to share practical ways to find God in your everyday life. And now today's host, Chris Lang.
A poll of American lawyers found that 56% of the divorce cases in 2002 involved one party having an obsessive interest in pornographic websites. This shockingly high number proves that the pornography toxin is effectively destroying marriages. Is there hope for couples who suffer from sexual addiction? Can couples rebuild trust and develop emotional, physical, and spiritual intimacy? Hello, I'm Chris Lang, and this is the second segment of a two-part series called Pornography, the Equal Opportunity Toxin. Today we will discuss the impact of sex and porn addiction on the spouse of the addict and the implications and fallout of disclosing the secret, as well as recovery and reconciliation issues. I want to introduce the guests on our distinguished panel here in the studio with me today. First of all, most of you saw Matthew Gamble on our first segment. Matthew is from Seattle, Washington. He's a speaker for Vagabond Servant International. He's a pastor of the 24/7 Ministry Center right in downtown Seattle. And he's also the founder of pureintegrity.org, which is a ministry designed to break the silence on the issue of pornography and offer solutions. Welcome back, Matthew.
Thank you very much, Chris.
And also Lyris Steuber, also on the first segment, is back. She's our contributing editor for Family and Relationships. She's a licensed mental health counselor and practices right here in Central Florida.
I'm glad to be here, Chris.
Welcome back, Lyris. And our special guest, who's joining us for part two, Lisa Hope, joins us all the way from Knoxville, Tennessee. She's the director of Adventist Christian Fellowship at the University of Tennessee. Welcome, Lisa.
Thanks, Chris.
Now, for those of you who did not see part one of this series on pornography, you can go to hopeonfire.org, and there you can find a video or audio version of the programs after the date of broadcast. So we welcome you to go and check that out. I want to start this inviting Lisa to share your story. Now, you were a guest on a previous program to talk about the journey and the struggle of losing your husband to cancer. But there's something else that's been on your heart, a burden on your heart that you were struggling with during that time of already a very stressful time, and would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Well, 9 months into my marriage, my husband was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and we were told it was a benign tumor that eventually did take his life. About another 9 months after he was first diagnosed with this tumor, I discovered his use of internet pornography. And I confronted him on that. Initially, he denied it and then admitted this was a problem. He assured me that this was a problem that he struggled with as a kid. It had nothing to do with me. He felt bad. He knew that I was hurt. And he promised that he was going to quit. It was going to be over. And at that point, I felt good about that. And we went on. Probably about a year or so after that, I discovered that that was not the case, that he was still involved. I found some unidentifiable charges on a credit card statement, did some research, realized it was adult websites. And at that point, I was livid. I was angry because he had told me, that this was over. I trusted him. I believed him. I believe he was sincere. And it struck me that there was more going on here than I really understood. And so at that point in time, I started doing some research and started reading about pornography addiction. And that was the first time that I even realized that was a term, pornography addiction. So it continued to be a struggle for us in our marriage, and an issue that brought serious pain. I think when he first was diagnosed, he kind of described it as a benign problem, sort of like his brain tumor was benign. But this pornography use and addiction just ate away at the health of our marriage, the emotional health of our marriage, the same way that his brain tumor was eating away at his physical health.
Wow. That's powerful.
It was a challenging journey, and his brain tumor eventually took him to the point where he couldn't use the computer, and I was relieved. This was a door that I could close. And
did you feel that was a battle won by default?
That's a good way to describe it. I was like, good, hey, we can close the door to this. I can go on. And it was about 2 months before he passed away that I was talking with a friend, and somehow we came around to this issue and found out that her husband was struggling with this as well. And it all of a sudden opened this door back up for me. And I fought it. I was like, wait a minute, this can't be a bigger issue. There can't be more. I felt very much alone as I went through this journey. And now to discover someone else who I knew personally going through the same pain and struggle in her marriage, I was kind of overwhelmed at that point. And that, for me, was kind of the start of feeling like, you know what, we need to talk about this. I'm not alone. And it was very powerful for me to realize that I wasn't alone. It was very healing for both me and my friend to realize, unfortunately, we were in good company.
Right. Now, one of the first questions that I've seen in getting ready for this program, and there's a number of resources on our website for this series, hopeonfire.org, and click on resources. There's a book that was written by the wife of Clay Crosse, a popular Christian musician, a recording artist, and one of the questions on her list that comes to women who are victims is, am I to blame? What do you all think about that from a woman's point of view? Is that, I mean, how do you respond to someone? What did you say to your friend when you found out, as far as whether or not she had anything to do with it?
Well, one of the first questions for me personally when I discovered this was, wow, what have I done wrong? Mm-hmm. Why am I not enough?
Yeah, and a lot of women, unfortunately, take it so personally because they feel like they're not good enough, or maybe they're not all enough to satisfy the needs of their husband. So their self-esteem tanks, obviously, but the reality is, yes, you are good enough. You're good enough for your husband. You're good enough for God. You're a great wife. But unfortunately, it's such a devastating sin. It not only affects your husband, but it affects your marriage.
Yeah.
And I think that as a husband, obviously I can't speak for the women, but having talked to my wife about it and seen the devastation that it causes her, the irony is a lot of men like myself, we have a big release when we talk to our spouses, and we for those of us that have a level of integrity and can talk about it and take ownership and admit our fault and admit our shame, it's a huge release. Mm-hmm. Whereas the woman is often devastated because they do feel like there's something wrong with them. Whereas generally speaking, it's our problem. It's something that we're doing, not as a result of our wives.
It's much more emotional for women.
Well, and that's a point, Lisa, that you brought up when we were talking about this in planning earlier. Why don't you explain the emotional versus intellectual dynamic there?
Well, for me, at this point, I know without a doubt that I was not to blame. This was my husband's issue that he dealt with. I understand that at an intellectual level. I understand, in part one, Chris was talking about how men kind of put their lives in silos, and this can be a silo over here, and their marriage can be over here, and they can separate that out. And I can understand that at this point from an intellectual level. But emotionally, I can't get that. As a woman, God created us, just the emotion just is part of our very being, and we can't separate that out. So I've had to come to the point that I understand, this was not my issue. However, I don't feel that at the emotional core of my being, and I've had to just accept that.
Well, there's so much we could talk about in this area. I think one of the key points, Matthew, that you brought up when we were discussing this is a key point for couples, is that they just need to communicate and try to develop an understanding, a context of each other's dynamics, the way they're wired, don't they?
Yeah, I really think, and if you're listening to this broadcast right now, and this is an issue in your marriage, it's not to say that the woman is to blame, but it is to say that a marriage is two people becoming one. And, you know, whatever doesn't kill you will make you stronger. And if you can approach this, as painful as it is for my wife to see the devastation she went through, you know, when she wrote out the ultimatum, as we talked about in the first part, she said in there, look, I'm committed to praying with you. I'm committed to going to counseling with you. I'm going to be here to be of support, but this behavior cannot continue. But what that said to me is that, all right, I've got somebody here that's with me in the journey, that's not saying, look, you're screwed up or you're messed up, you're a sicko. You're a pervert, and you know, kicking me out of the house. Right. She was committed to working on it, and as a result, it made our marriage stronger.
That's awesome. Okay, before the break, let's talk this next question. This is a very key one. The wife or the spouse of the addict wants to know, how could I have known? What are some observable signs and symptoms of sex and porn addiction?
Well, the obvious, Chris, is direct evidence. Obviously, if you find a magazine or you see a website that your spouse may be on. Some other signs and symptoms may be depression, acting withdrawn, mood swings, a lack of concern about your marriage if there's something going on that your spouse is disregarding, a lack of communication, isolation. Maybe your spouse is becoming more isolative. Maybe they're becoming more secretive about their computer use, using the computers.
Maybe staying up later.
Staying
or
up
being
late,
at work later.
all hours of the night. Perhaps you're catching them in lying, you know, about their behavior and whereabouts and things like that. So those are just some points of evidence that you might want to watch out for.
What about intuition? Does that play into it?
A spouse's intuition?
Yeah. Is there
a woman's intuition is very powerful.
I've heard it's quite powerful.
Yes, and intuition, yes. I mean, if you have a gut feeling about something's not right, you know, your sexual time together, something's changed, you know, that's a time to really ask questions and evaluate what's going on.
I'm sure that a woman of prayer, God is not mocked. God has, I really believe God puts a special sanctity on that marriage. I mean, it's one of the two institutions from creation. And so I'm sure a woman of prayer can be given that extra level of intuition and understanding.
Discernment, yes.
Yeah. So we're just about to go into the break. I want you to think about, and we'll hopefully respond to this after the break, what is a general principle that helps a person assess their motive to stay in the relationship? We hope you all will stay with us. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to Hope on Fire, relevant talk radio for young adults. I'm here in the studio today with Lisa Hope, Matthew Gamble, and Lyris Steuber. We were in the middle of, I was in the middle of asking you a question, and I thought it would be great to hear your feedback. What is the general principle that helps a person assess whether to stay or leave? Is it whether it's based on codependency or a healthy commitment to serve? What are your thoughts on that? Lyris, let's start with you.
Sure, Chris. I think overall, just to give an umbrella, I think in order for the wife to decide whether or not she's going to stay in the relationship, there has to be repentance on the part of the offending spouse, of the husband. And that means a turning away from behavior and going in a different direction. Not to say it's going to be easy, but that needs to happen first and foremost. And for wives, sometimes it may be hard to know what to do. Maybe they might want to choose to stay in the relationship because of familiarity. Maybe there's a fear of change. Maybe she's financially dependent on him. But I'm here to say it's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to draw a line in the sand, just like your wife did, Matthew, and to say, okay, I'm going to be your partner in this recovery, but these are the things that are not acceptable. But this is how I'm going to help you.
Right. And Ted Roberts, he's the author of a book called Pure Desire. It's a great book, great resource. he says that, you know, when you're engaging in this battle, as we talked about in the first session, that this is a battle.
Right.
As you begin to engage, recognize that this is going to be a solid 3 to 5 year battle of intense warfare. This is, for most men, not going to be something that's just going to go away overnight. And so for the woman, you know, again, like my wife, I want to emphasize to the female listeners out there, take a stand. I mean, be rigid, be firm in the stand. Don't put up with pornography in the house, in the relationship, period. But at the same time, recognize that this is not going to be an overnight quick fix. You know, Oprah is coined as saying this is the biggest drug problem in our nation today. You know, recognize that this is a drug addiction. And the problem with this thing is it's on tap all the time. And it's available all over the place, free on the internet, and it's, you know, pornography, in my definition, is anything that's stimulating visually, and that's everywhere we go as men. Mm-hmm. So for the woman to recognize, have that compassion that, okay, I'm joining with my partner in this battle, as long as Lyris said, that they have that repentant attitude.
Sure. And as a wife, I mean, you can make good choices as far as what comes into your house.
Absolutely.
Movies, videos, places that you go, things that you expose your and your husband to. Yeah,
yes.
Victoria's Secret catalogs if need be.
And it is a journey for the wife. I know for me, initially when things came to a head and I realized that this was a serious problem, I wanted to shut the door. I wanted to say, you know what, this needs to quit. I don't want any, you know, there was like no room
so you
for
looked
error.
For perfection after it came out.
Yeah, initially, I mean, I was so hurt and so devastated and just crushed emotionally. And then as I learned more, I learned that it is going to be a journey. It's a battle that's going to go on for, you know, 3 to 5 years, possibly, like Matt said. And so it was kind of like touch and go and try and figure out along the way. I mean, it's real easy to read the books and say, okay, this is what you should do, this is step by step. But in real life, it's the emotional battle and tug of war of, I love this man, I want to be here, I've committed to life with you, you know, for better, for worse, versus this is unacceptable. And finding that balance. And I think, you know, for women, I just want to say it's a journey. We need to realize that the emotions, it's an emotional roller coaster.
And to not make impulsive decisions about what to do and, you know, I'm ready to leave as soon as you find out.
Yeah.
And I do think it's important also from what I've read that it's not love if we enable the spouse to continue acting out. That's not love. Love sometimes is tough. Love sometimes draws a line in the sand and doesn't allow that. So I hear where you're coming from, Lisa. That kind of feeds into the next question. If there's a spouse who's listening tonight and they're asking the question, will I ever be able to trust my husband or wife again? How do you respond to them once they've repented? Once they've started on a road, Matthew, you talked about your battle plan in part 1. Both parties are engaging in that process now. What do you say to the wife or the husband of the addict? Will I ever be able to trust my spouse again?
If I can respond to that, for me and in my relationship with my wife, it does take time. I mean, it is a devastating blow, especially for women to hear this issue. For most women, it is. And but for my wife, you know, she sees me attending a group every week. She sees and knows that I'm going to counseling. She knows that I'm reading on this issue, that I'm working, you know, the 12 steps, that I'm taking strides towards this. You know, that I'm not just sitting back, you know, blowing it off and making it sound like it's not a big deal. I'm taking ownership of it, and I'm exercising my battle plan. And I think that seeing that brings comfort to her, because she knows that I'm doing this because I'm committed to the relationship. I love her more than I love this sin. You know, no questions asked. So I'm willing to do, you know, whatever it takes to make sure that that relationship stays strong, that we're growing. Again, that this behavior doesn't kill us, and that through it we're actually going to become stronger and be victorious on the other side.
And to also answer that question, Chris, the answer is yes. With God's grace and help, and with forgiveness on one side and repentance on the other, yes, trust can be restored.
And again, I just want to emphasize it's a journey. And for me, a big part of it was this was a spiritual journey for me. And being able, initially, like I said, I wanted perfection from my husband, and it was his issue. And then for me, God started showing me things in my life that I needed to address, and codependent issues that I had that didn't excuse my husband by any means, but yet was I willing to grow? Was I willing to grow emotionally, grow spiritually, and ultimately grow more dependent on God so that I could literally turn my marriage, turn my husband over to God and completely release it to him.
That's tremendous.
And that is a journey that we have to be willing to enter into as well.
Let's talk about that a little bit more, because Patrick Carnes, a noted researcher in this area, reported that 4 out of 5 sex addicts have been sexually abused, 3 out of 4 were physically abused, and nearly all were emotionally abused. He said a lot of the research shows that many times people find each other. Most times both spouses have been abused in some fashion, almost always. How would you counsel the victim of the addict to look at their own wounds, sort of like you began to look into areas in your own life? How do you help that person see that it's not just the addict's problem, because you're a team?
Yeah, well, it's a problem that you have to battle together. So for a wife, yes, it's important to address, okay, so what in my past history or what insecurities fuel my dependence on this relationship or fuel my desire to enter this marriage or relationship in the first place, or to perhaps excuse this behavior. It's important as a wife that she address those issues and find healing into whatever pain in her past that may contribute to either her not being able to forgive or move on or draw those lines in the sand and stand up to her husband.
That must be one of the most difficult things for the spouse of the addict to do, to admit that they've brought some dysfunction to the relationship also. Mm-hmm. Matthew, did you have a comment?
Well, I was just going to say, I love Patrick Carnes' writings. He's a very insightful guy, but the reality is we're all broken.
Right.
We all have emotional pain. We all have, we've all been born and raised in an imperfect home.
Right.
So, in essence, we've all been abused in one way or another. My parents were not physically abusive or sexually abusive to me, but I'm sure there are areas of emotional abuse or however you want to coin that. So the reality is that we can take ownership and say that, hey, we're not perfect, and what is it in our lives that we can do to strive to continue to become more whole. Each one of us, in my opinion, have that need, that desire to be the person that God's created us to be, and by His grace we can become that.
Last question. We have 2 minutes left. What would you say to the person whose addict spouse didn't demonstrate commitment to recovery? How can I know if it's time to end the relationship?
Wow, that's a heavy question.
It's a serious one.
And I think, this goes back to what we were talking about, if there's really true brokenness and repentance. As sinners, we experience God's grace every day when we ask for forgiveness. But if someone refuses to take accountability, refuses to take those steps towards recovery, maybe even starts blaming you as a wife for not being pretty enough or satisfying enough or whatever, then those are some indicators that maybe this person is, not the best person for you to be with, and maybe God has something better.
And again, I keep coming back to it's a journey for the wife emotionally, because it's scary to think that this marriage might end. For me, it took me getting to a place spiritually where I could just turn everything over to God completely. And my situation is somewhat unique because my husband was dealing with a brain tumor at the same time. But when it came to the point where I needed to give an ultimatum and say, this is what I expect of you, or else, I couldn't have gotten there unless I was connected with God, and God brought me to that point of just complete surrender to Him. Say, I'm dependent on God. I'm not dependent on my husband. I'm not dependent on this marriage in order to make it. I'm completely dependent on God.
And one of the best things as a teenager that my parents did, I was 19 years old. It was hard for them, but they kicked me out of the house. It was one of the best things they ever did for me. When I'm married, my wife finds out about this. It's a repeated behavior. She gives me an ultimatum. And what it's called to the addict is hitting rock bottom. And unless an addict hits rock bottom, the behavior will continue.
Thank you all very much for being on the program today, Lisa and Matthew and Lyris. Again, I would invite each of you listening today to come to our website, hopeonfire.org, and God bless you.
Hope on Fire is produced by Livestreams Media, a listener-supported ministry. To download a free copy of today's program or be a part of our social network, please visit our website at hopeonfire.org. You may also contact us by writing to Livestreams Media, P.O. Box 608513, Orlando, Florida 32860. Once again, that's Livestreams Media, P.O. Box 608513, Orlando, Florida 32860, or online at hopeonfire.org. Thank you so much for your letters and continued support. Until next time, may God set your hope on fire.